Good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Justin Wrench, and I will be chairing this meeting. Before we proceed to the main business of the meeting, I will go through a few items of housekeeping. So this evening we are not expecting a fire alarm, but should one sound, please could members exit to the rear of the chamber and assemble in the car park. Please can I remind you to make sure that your phones and other devices should be switched to silent. And if members wish to speak during debates this evening, please can you indicate by raising your hand and I'll come to you at the most appropriate time. As usual, this meeting is being webcasted, so please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and please switch them off when you are finished to avoid any interference. So I will now proceed to the main business of the meeting. So agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. So I have apologies that have been received from Councillor Richard van Dolken, but I'm pleased to see that we have a substitute this evening and welcome Councillor Ethan Williams. We also have apologies from Councillor Tom Walsh and Councillor Paul Heath. I believe that's all the apologies we have. Yep. So agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. So do members have any disclosable pecuniary interests, other pecuniary interests or non-pecuniary interests that they wish to declare this evening? Okay, thank you. So therefore we'll now move on to agenda item 3, which are the minutes of the previous meeting. So I know some members may not have been at this committee before. You can still approve the minutes in your absence of the last meeting. So please can I have a proposer to approve the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting of our Governance and Audit Committee held on November the 27th, 2024. Thank you, Councillor Hooks. And could I please have a seconder, Councillor Ramage. So the minutes have been moved and seconded as an accurate record. All those in favour, please indicate by show of hands. Thank you, members. The minutes are approved, and I will just spend a moment just to sign those this evening. Okay, thank you. Okay, next we move on to agenda item 4, which is public question time. And I can confirm this evening that there are no registered speakers for this evening's meeting. So we will now proceed to agenda item 5, which is the External Auditor's Audit Completion Report for the financial year ended 31st of March 2021. So the report this evening has been set out on pages 6 to 13 of the agenda. Okay, yes, is that one?
Oh, yeah. That was one. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. So we will be looking, at the key financial indicators, and this is set out on pages 6 to 13 of tonight's agenda. And please can I invite Phil Myers, the Head of Finance, to present this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. As is set out here, so this is the key financial indicators for the period from the start of the year to the end of November, and it also provides also the second quarter financial review as well, in a sort of high level, because you will have seen that was reported to Cabinet on the 25th of November, so there is a bit more detail that's provided in the actual report. So just quickly going through some of the sort of key points in this. In terms of the second quarter review, we are reporting a budgeted variance of 1.9 million, positive variance in the year. You can see that the majority of the main reason for that is that we're actually forecasting an overachievement of income of £2.1 million, which is primarily in two areas: treasury management interest and dividends, and the green waste subscriptions, where you'll be aware that demand has sort of exceeded our sort of original expectations. And you'll probably be also aware that during the budget process for next year, the 25-26, that those two items have been sort of key to providing some of the income into next year that we've used for the budget. There are several other areas where we're overachieving as well in income around council tax sharing, which is an arrangement we have with the major preceptors, and also on some of the recycling material, which is very much influenced by pricing, market prices. In terms of our expenditure, we're forecasting across services £541,000 underspend. We do have an allowance in the budget for vacancies and the like that we expect to occur in the year, and that of £300,000. And we've also had to make provision for the extra cost of the staff pay award. So taking those two into account, the sort of net position on the staffing side is a net £70,000. In terms of other expenditure, we are forecasting a slight overspend of 176,000, and that's mainly in the areas that are sort of listed in paragraph 3.35. In terms of the financial indicators, so just some of the points draw out here. So it obviously references the capital programme and the spend up to the end of the period, out of a programme of, well, we've got a total programme of 14.1 million, of which just under 9 of that was profiled to be spent in the current financial year, and 2.3 million was actually spent at the end of the period. We are projecting a positive variance across the whole programme, but that is still subject to some close down of some of the larger projects that we've got in the programme. So that figure is still to be confirmed once those projects have been formally concluded. In terms of capital receipt, so we've had some land sales that we've had, and we had a sale and leaseback arrangement where we have sort of effectively sold vehicles and then we lease those back, which is a traditional arrangement of how we finance our vehicles. In terms of right to buy receipts, you'll note that again, this is the third successive quarter, there'd been no sales, which sort of followed the rapid rise in interest rates, so we've had no receipts from that by the end of this quarter. In terms of the lettable units, the commercial property, so occupancy rate at the end of November was slightly down on what we previously reported, not hugely concerning, and you'll see that there are 2 vacant units that we're expecting to be let from January 25, so we expect that position to correct itself going forward. Council tax collections, positive. Business rates are just flag there, so collection rate on business rates 72.2%, which is shy of what we were collecting for the same period last year, and as is explained here, we did have a significant increase in the collectible amount in the run up to this reporting period, as we received sort of valuations on some of the new properties, particularly on the Horizon 120 Business Park. So the amount of business rates collectible increased quite significantly, but there was insufficient time before this report had to be cast for that to be collected. What we have seen is that since the period end, we did receive some significant payments. So again, I'm expecting at the next report that the position on collection for business rates will look better than it does at the moment. In terms of write-offs, you'll probably note that on both council tax and business rates, again, year on year, we're probably writing off more than we've typically done. So we have been actively reviewing our aged debt. That's sort of led to that increase. Again, the proportion that's actually been written off in both cases is in actual fact very small compared to the amounts that we are collecting. So no cause for concern there. We do have provisions that we make for non-collectible debt, and in both cases the amounts that have been written off are well within those provisions. So as I said, not concerned there, and it is some of it is about a catch-up of reviewing our aged debt. In terms of sundry debts, 2.8 million was outstanding at the end of the period, of which 1 million was at invoice stage, so still a point where we wouldn't consider there to be an issue. Housing benefit overpayments, pretty constant at around the 1.3 million. We do collect sums against that, but we are restricted through regulations as to what we can enforce in terms of payments on that. On the supplier payments, performance about 98% in terms of payments made within the 30 days. Which is shy of the actual target, and but I think is a reflection. We have had quite a bit of change in the organisation in this year, and so I think some of the issue here is really about people sort of getting up to speed with the processes that we have in place and the like. So, and the finance team continue to work with those areas to make sure that they are processing their payments in a timely fashion. In terms of treasury management, I won't say too much because there is a separate report on this, but again, it's just underlined the income that we're generating from this area in both terms, short-term investments that we're gathering, so nearly £2 million of interest, and then further monies that we're earning through our more strategic pooled funds, which we've had in place for many years, where dividend income was 573,000. So I'll happy to take questions.
No, thank you ever so much, Phil. Do any members have any questions for this report? Okay. Yep, Councillor Prime.
Thank you, Phil. Just a quick point, and it's probably my reading of this. Item 3.412, investments of 58 million, and we received 1.95 interest. Do we pay tax on that interest?
No, we don't. We're not a tax body in that sense. No.
Councillor Ramage.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just one query I've got as far as under point 336, you make reference to green waste subscriptions. How is that in comparison? Because we've been running that, what, a year now, thereabouts, something like that. How is that comparing from the previous year? Is it up, and do you anticipate it increasing this year as such?
So in terms of the green waste subscription, so we're essentially in the first year, of that,
Yeah.
aren't we? We started,
Yeah.
so it started at the tail end of the last financial year. So
Yeah.
so we're still, I suppose, in that first year, yeah. So the subscription level is the number of subscriptions exceeded certainly the numbers that we anticipated when the original proposal to introduce the charge was made. So we're obviously just now starting the subscription window for the second year, which will come in from April. So at the moment, we're still sort of early days on that. I think that's only been open for a week, if that's so.
I'm not sure if, but is the subscription going to be staying the same for the next year?
So yeah, so the core price of £55, yes, that was agreed by the cabinet back in September, and that's what's been reflected through in terms of the budget assumptions.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions, we're asked to note the following. So the first thing that we're asked to note is the report of the key financial indicators as of the 30th of November 2024, and also the second quarter financial review and budget forecast outturn for the financial year 2024-25. So members, with a raise of hand, please could I take this report as noted? Thank you, members. The report has been noted, and we will now proceed to agenda item 6, which is the statement of accounts from 2023-24 and the external auditors' year-end reports.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep, sorry, Mark. I'll just, before I hand over to Mark, who I know is going to introduce, I'd just like to welcome both Emma Larkham and Mark Twyford from KPMG. They will, after Mark Jarvis has reported, they will then add some detail to that as well. So apologies, Mark, but over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, members. So there are two parts to this report. One is to approve the statement of accounts for 23-24, that I'll give a very brief summary, and then I'll pass over to our colleagues at KPMG on the audit report. So members have obviously been briefed fairly extensively on the audit backlog a number of times, but in the context of 23-24 accounts, the audits regs that was revised in 2024, it requires members to approve the 23-24 statement of accounts no later than the required backstop date of the 28th of February. So in terms of where we got there, in terms of signing the accounts, the council had a requirement to close the accounts by the 31st of May deadline. At that time, the backstop arrangements weren't known. We actually published a day earlier than that, on the 30th of May, thanks obviously to the finance team and key personnel across the authority. To note that achievement, and to put it in perspective, it is understood that only 40% of local authorities were able to meet that deadline, and that was given the issues around the backstop dates and the backlog of local government audit. Although they were published, they were not signed, given that we had 4 years' worth of audits still outstanding at that time, and also we was not aware of the backstop arrangements. Once there was clarity around the backstop arrangements, and we got the revised regulations in September, the accounts were signed on the 10th of October, and the public inspection notice ran from the 13th of October for 6 weeks. In the report, there is a link to the statement of accounts. I'm obviously happy to take any questions on that before I pass over to our colleagues at KPMG.
Would anybody like to ask Mark any questions at this point?
Are we talking about 23-24 here, or 22-20? What year are we talking about?
It's about 23-24, because obviously it's part of the backstop arrangements.
My understanding there was a backstop on the 25th of February, is it?
The backstop arrangements for the
28th of February.
Yeah, so the backstop arrangements for the 23-24 accounts is on the 20th of February. Obviously, in terms of 22-23 accounts, the backstop date was the 13th of December 24, where the accounts were disclaimed.
Where do you think we are with this situation now, as far as this particular subject is concerned?
I think it will take time to unravel. I think that's saying, obviously, I think from talking to our colleagues at KPMG, it will take time to get back into the normal routine. And obviously for KPMG to start building some reliance on the figures, because obviously given that our previous auditors were not able to give assurance on the 2021, 22 and the 22, 23 accounts, obviously it will take time for KPMG to get that resilience or build that.
One I assume is that where you're involved now, it's kind of an interim figure, is it? You're putting together an audit as such, because you can't complete the others. The others are not completed, so you can't do your bit because it's like a.
Yes, I mean I can run through that in my. If you want me just to, if I just go through the report, then I'll then I'll take you through. So we've got two reports on the agenda today, but the first one is around the sort of status of our year-end audit for the 23-24 accounts. So within this report, we do take you through sort of the impact of the backstop dates. I think what is important to recognise is we do have a period of unaudited accounts for the last 2 years, as Mark's just explained. What that has meant is that we do not have any work or comfort over that opening position for the last 2 years. There is a period of time where it will take for us to rebuild that assurance, which is what the government has advised us to do through the guidance that they issued. The time for that to take will take a couple of years to work through, because essentially we have to say we had a reserves balance which has been unaudited for a number of years, and we need to work out how we get comfortable with that without doing. I think that is quite clear that there isn't a desire to go back and fully audit the previous 2 years, because that obviously doesn't help with bringing the system back to a stable state. So as a system, we are working on how we deal with that sort of rebuilding of those, particularly of those reserve balances. But what that doesn't mean is that we haven't done any work this year, and I think that's important for the committee to understand. So whilst you will get a disclaimed audit opinion, because we do not have assurance over opening balances, we don't have assurance over the reserves movements, and we haven't been able to complete all of our work due to the time constraints implied by the backstop date, and also recognising that obviously the finance team during 23-24 were dealing with the closure of a number of different audits, which obviously put a lot of pressure on them to be able to also service yet another audit. So what I have done is, if I just talk you through probably page 21 of the main pack, or page 5 of my document, sort of sets out the work that we have been able to conclude on this year. So key areas that we have done, so we completed all our work around pensions, so understanding those pension figures. We've also completed a number of areas of work around sort of employee expenses, so your payroll type balances, treasury and debt within the year, a number of the what we would call material non-significant accounts, so the large balances but not necessarily the ones which we consider there to be risk over. We did have a look at sort of the existence and ownership of property, plant, equipment and investment property, as well as looking at financial investments and doing a number of income and expenditure procedures. So there's been a number of pieces of work that have been completed over balances in the year. The key ones where we haven't been able to complete or conclude our work fully is around those opening balances, as explained before, the movements in reserves, primarily because of that issue around the opening position being unknown. And then we have not been able to complete work around the sort of valuation of the land and buildings, investment properties, or all of our management override of controls work, and a few of the other balances. The main reason the land and building piece of work would have been a significant piece of work to do, and I think we collectively made a decision that actually probably for this year we probably wouldn't get through it all, so therefore we made the decision to stop that, and we will absolutely look at that for next year. So that's where we are. The rest of the report then sort of takes you through some of the areas that we'd identified in our planning memo that we brought to you earlier in the year, and gives you an update as to those key risk areas where we have been able to do work. So on the subsequent page, on page 22 of the pack, just gives you that high-level summary that we haven't been able to complete work around the valuation of property, plant, equipment or investment properties, or conclude all of our work around management override of controls, but we have completed all of our work around pensions. In terms of other areas, just to pull out for you, I think what is probably worth noting is that despite us not completing an audit, where we did do the work, we actually found very little in terms of adjustments or work. So I think we've got one very small difference on some of the pensions values. I mean, actually, they might get even smaller. I think we were just waiting on one piece of work to have a look at. So actually, where we have concluded work is you know, it has been clean. We haven't found lots of issues, which you should take some comfort in. We've identified a couple of control deficiencies. Some are related to value for money, which Mark will take you through in a moment. But the other ones are around areas such as the management review of actuarial assumptions and journal reviews. What I would say on these is that the threshold within the auditing standards to be able to pass what we call a management review control is very high in terms of the level of documentation that is required for us to be able to say we would rely on that as an effective control. That doesn't mean that there are no controls in play. It just means that they don't quite meet the threshold of what the auditing standard means. And I'm not sitting here saying that there are no journal controls and Phil just is signing off anything. That isn't the case at all. It's just that the level of documentation would be sort of operationally inefficient to do so. I say we'll come back to value for money in the second report if that's okay. But just in terms of the appendices, just for note, there is some detail around the reset and recovery period, so what we expect to see in the system over the next couple of years to get us to that rebuilt assurance position, as well as some mandatory communications that we're just required to communicate to you, a position on the fees and our confirmation of independence. But I'll pause there if that's okay and take any questions, and then we can come back to VFM.
Thank you very much, Emma. I've got a question already from Councillor Bohr, but members, please raise your hand if you'd like to ask. I've also got Councillor Prime as well, so any other members, please raise. Thank you.
Thank you. My question, I suppose, is for Emma, possibly for this Mark. Looking at the significant risks and other audit risks, they're all quite high, apart from the pension retirement obligations, which has been something quite controversial in press recently. Allegations that some councils are spending a very high percentage of their income on pensions. I want to focus on the valuation of land and buildings and investment property. Why might the valuation of buildings and land be too high? And what are the likely reasons for that?
So, could I just check, just clarify that?
I realise you haven't done
but just clarify, are you taking that assumption from the graph on page 24? Is that
yes.
one? Yeah. So that graph on page 24 is our assessment of audit risk. So essentially saying, is there a high risk of material misstatement within that valuation? And actually, if there was, what would the impact be on the financial statements? So the reason that the valuation of the property and investment properties sits in that corner is that a lot of the valuation basis for when you're valuing property is based on a number of different assumptions. And actually, those assumptions only have to move very slightly sometimes in terms of sort of yield rates for investment properties or some of the inputs that are being used, which could actually have a small adjustment could have a very large change in the valuation of properties. So that's why we ended up in that corner of that graph, because essentially we're saying there's a lot of judgment in those valuation basis, and it wouldn't take a lot for there to be a high level of material misstatement, which would then obviously have quite a large impact on the financial statements, which is why it ends up in that corner. That's not to say that we have identified anything through the work that we have done to suggest that there is an error. It's just saying that from an audit risk point of view, we consider there to be risk that there could be.
Thank you. Next I have Councillor Prime.
Thank you, Chair. Not sure who's going to answer this one, but maybe you will be. Item 5.2, page 15. We know 21, 22, 22, 23 from the previous accountants were unaudited. you've put a disclaimer in for 23-24 because you can't have an opening balance, you've already said that. Is this going to be a never-ending circle? So when you come to next year to do the audits, you still haven't got a completed opening balance. So, and then it will go on because you can't order it because it's a disclaimer there, and then it's going to happen again the following year. Is there a circle that's never going to end, or will you eventually catch up in the life of your times as auditing our accounts?
So you're absolutely right. For next year, there will remain a disclaimed position. But what we will do is rebuild assurance, and that is the second phase. So when we were talking before about the what's happening with the system is essentially we reset the system. That was the position to do. That's why we sort of the backstop dates have been there to do that. There will now be a period over the next 2 to 3 years where we will do procedures over the previous periods. Now, that is not to say we would go and do a full audit again, but it's around saying how do we get comfortable over those balances that we haven't been able to do. Now, for some instances, for the opening balance of, some of the areas we'll be able to get quite comfortable quite quickly. Cash, for example, will next year be in a position where we have a known closing position on the cash because we've audited it this year, and an opening position on cash. So next year we're comfortable with that position. What areas where it takes longer will be things like the PPE valuations, because you don't have a full valuation of everything every single year. There'll be a period of time where we have to sort of rebuild our knowledge and comfort over that balance. I say that the one that is a little bit more tricky to think about and work through is around reserves, because obviously there's a lot of movements, all of which happen within the previous years. So there is currently some work being done to identify as a system how we might get comfortable over those reserve balances. So absolutely, it'll take a little bit of time, but the answer is not, we'll never get to a clean opinion. We absolutely have a route through to be able to get an unmodified opinion in the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you. I have Councillor Wright.
Right, thank you. Well, you've answered the first part of my question, because it was going to be very similar to what Councillor Prime just said. We're being moved on to a new authority in 2 or 3 years' time. Will you be caught up by then, and will the final accounts be fully audited before to move on to the new authority?
So I don't think I can sit here and tell you absolutely yes, you'll have a completely clean set of accounts, because it will take time to rebuild that assurance. But what we will be is obviously working and understanding what is happening with local government reorganisation, understanding where that needs to be, what work we might need to do to get into a position for any new organisation in terms of any handover, because obviously we would, expect that we'll be taking over elements from an audit from however the PSAA wants to move that. But there will be work to be done to make sure that you haven't got suddenly lots of disclaimed positions and how that might be managed. But I haven't got an answer for you just yet as to how that might work.
Will that cause any serious problems, though? Getting the final accounts for Braintree District Council when it goes over to the new unitary authority? Will there be a problem because you haven't got a fully set of audited accounts?
I think similar to what we have
will
here,
it drag on a bit?
it will be a case of how you rebuild that assurance. So from my perspective, for Braintree, what we need to do is as quickly as possible get to rebuild the assurance in most of the ways we can. So as I'm saying, if we can get the balances we can get comfortable over quickly, we should do so over the next year or two. And where there would then be a position where there is a known bit that hasn't got the assurance, and we would then be able to work out how we do that, for the new auditor, whoever that may be, would say, well, actually, that's my risk area, and we would work on that. Well, yes, exactly. So if it's my problem, I'll be wanting to deal with it. That is absolutely something that will be thought about, but say it's probably just a little bit too early for me to give you an answer is exactly how that approach would be. But it will be something we will consider.
The MP said, it's going to be next year, but I don't think that's going to be the case.
Thank you. Councillor Ramage, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Emma, there's a couple of points I would like to raise. Under the heading of Other Significant Matters, which is on page 36, the last paragraph of that, it states However, we have been unable to access documentation of the decision making and challenge raised in this discussion. Could you explain what documents you're sort of...
This is probably one for me to pick up actually, because it relates to the BFM findings rather than the audit findings.
Sorry, Mark, could you just pop your microphone on if possible? Thank you.
Apologies. Yeah, so I mean, I will come on to this in a bit more detail in a second when we run through the auditor's annual report, but effectively what we're talking about there in terms of the Wethersfield decision-making processes, we have run through the kind of timeline of the decision-making process on Wethersfield. We've carried out inquiries of all of the personnel involved, and we've satisfied ourselves that at each stage of the process there's been appropriate challenge, discussion, scrutiny raised. The issue we have, and also that constitutionally the right people have been involved in the decision-making processes. What we have found is, due to the kind of time pressure on a lot of those decisions, so decisions needing to be made within, say, 24-hour period, those discussions that took place haven't necessarily been documented and minuted as we would usually expect, and then actually in terms of leaving a trail for that decision-making process and the scrutiny that has been applied, I suppose rather than us speaking to all the individuals involved, best practice would be to post-event document those processes and document the discussion that's taken place, so that there is kind of an evidence trail, so to speak.
Thank you for that. The other question is under the heading of fees. You state we have in progress consideration of impact on our fees. So, I mean, are you sort of thinking that you need to be charging more going forward? Because is it 164,000 is the figure, is it?
So yes, so on page 47 of the pack, so we've set out where we are with fees. So the scale fee set by the PSAA for the audit is the 164. We have then identified a number of areas where we've done some additional work, which is what we would consider a fee variation, so that would be an additional cost. So these ones, if I just quickly run down them for you. So ISA 315 revised is the new auditing standard. When the scale fee was set, this was not included within the scale fee. It will be going forward. So the PSAA has advised us for this year that we've had to just make that as a separate fee variation. So for next year, you'll see that £10,000 will essentially become part of your base scale fee. For value for money, the scale fee is set on the basis that there are no significant risks. We've identified 2 additional significant risks that we've had to do additional work over, so that is the fee for those. So again, if we don't identify any significant risks, there would going forward be no additional fee. We then had just 2 small points around sort of delivery points. So we had first year audit, absolutely there's always going to be some delays. We had a couple of areas where, in my view, sort of went beyond that sort of normal delay. With management, we're working through those, so we wouldn't expect that to be a recurrent piece for next year. We did have to do some work around PPE classification. I know Phil and I have just got to have a final conversation about that in terms of the fee charged for that, but that's where we had to go and do some additional consultation with our technical experts to make sure we were comfortable with the treatment of how some of the PPE was disclosed. And then finally, the disclaimer. Because we have to issue a disclaimer opinion, that is a very different type of opinion. We have to have multiple levels of consultation. We've obviously had to do lots of work to be able to get just to a disclaimed opinion. And so there will be a small additional fee for that, which we expect to be in the region of sort of 4,000 to 5,000 for that. So the majority of those are one-off additional fees for this year that I wouldn't necessarily expect to see next year. As I say, 315 will be wrapped up going forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. If you've got additional work, which you pointed out at the beginning, you had 2 other things, is that consultation with the management that you do that work, or how does that happen? Do you find that additional work, or are you being asked to deal with that particular? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, it's areas where we would say, so the PPE classification one, for example, is there has been a judgment made around how some of the PPE has been disclosed versus an investment property. That's not necessarily a clear-cut decision. Management had a view, they presented us with a view as to why when we asked the question. We have to go away and have a think about that, make sure that we are comfortable with that position, and in doing so did consult with our technical team internally, and that obviously has an additional fee. So that's work that we have to do to be able to give you assurance.
Just a final comment on that. I mean, presume that's quite normal for any audit that you do. You get these additional things come along every now and again, I assume.
Yes, absolutely. So where we have unusual items like that, so where it's sort of not the standard practice, we would have that level of consultation, and that again would always be an additional scope variation, we would call it, for any other.
Thanks for that.
And Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you. It was just a comment, really, following up after what Councillor Wright said, and because there are some new people here, just to say this is not a new thing. This committee's been talking about the audits for quite a long time now, torturous at times. But we're not the only council, are we? Just if you sit here and you're new, you might think it's just Braintree District Council that's in this situation, and going forward to the devolved situation would be the only one, but presumably most of the other councils are also in the similar situation to us. So I just didn't want people to think we were on our own, so to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out and that clarification. Members, we asked the following. So the first thing we're asked is to receive and note the external auditor's end-of-year report for the year ended the 31st of March 2024. But we also need to approve the statement of accounts for 2023-24. But this is subject to any amendments identified during the final stages of the completion of the external audit by KPMG, which, in the opinion of the Section 151 officer, who is Phil Myers, are minor in nature. So, for example, they might be defined as non-material to the finance position of the council. And finally, we are to delegate the authority to the Section 151 officer in consultation with myself, the chair of the Governance and Audit Committee, to make any amendments that may be needed as a result of that. So, as we need to approve this, I would need a proposer for the recommendations, Councillor Ramage, and also a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Ball. So, members, the recommendations have been moved and seconded. I will now put this to a vote. So, all those in favour, please indicate by show of hands. Okay, thank you, members. That is unanimous. So, the recommendation has been approved. So, we will now move to agenda item 7, which is the External Auditor's Annual Report for the financial year ended the 31st of March 2024. Again, this time this is set out on pages 59 to 84 of tonight's agenda. And can I please introduce Emma to present this report? Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. So this is our annual auditor's report, which is essentially the summary of the work that we have completed during the year. So it gives a high-level summary of the financial statements position, so a very summarised version of the report that we've just been through. But its main purpose is really to give you the detailed value for money findings and our written narrative. I'm going to let Mark, given he did all the brilliant work, run you through our findings and the value for money. What I will say is a lot of this you have seen previously as a committee, some of this information, because we did bring a sort of a risk assessment to you. And this is sort of our final conclusion on that. But Mark, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. So, yeah, I won't. I'll take the report as read in general, but I won't dwell on probably the points that we've raised previously. But I suppose we'd split into 3 areas our report. So we've got financial sustainability, we have governance, and we have improving efficiency, economy, and effectiveness. There's not much to report in regard to, or not much to draw attention to in regard to financial sustainability. I'd probably just draw attention to page 14 of our report, so page 74 of the pack, really, which just draws attention to the benchmarking of the council against the national average data, and I think really just demonstrates that the council is in a pretty good position, which is something we wanted to highlight in our reporting, but no findings there in terms of significant risks, and therefore nothing to report in terms of significant weaknesses either. Moving on to the next section of the report, we've got the section on governance. As we reported last time we brought this to committee, we have found a significant risk in this area, which is in regard to the Wethersfield site legal action. Now, just to clarify, a significant risk is not an alarm bell. It's not a bad thing in of itself. It is similar to what you would find in our accounts assessment, where we say there's a significant risk. It's just an area where we need to focus more of our efforts based on the circumstances we've identified. So we identified a significant risk in regard to the decision-making process around the legal action undertaken, and our response has very much been constructed around reviewing the timeline of events, reviewing documentation available into that decision-making process, and coming to a conclusion on whether that has followed the constitutional requirements of the council. Our conclusion is that and I think we discussed this slightly earlier, was that has been followed, that constitutionally the appropriate personnel were involved. We have satisfied ourselves through inquiry that there was challenge throughout the process, and that appropriate legal consultation was also undertaken. We do have a recommendation to make in that regard, which is also discussed in the ISA, and that is just in regard to that process around where we have those time pressured decisions, that if there isn't time to document formally the decisions making process undertaken at the time, that should be done subsequent to the event. We've also identified another recommendation, which is just in regard to the formal policies of the council. So this would be things like the disciplinary policies, registers of interest, all of those kind of, and employees, gifts and entertaining, those kind of things. So any formal policy for employees or members of the council. And the recommendation, and again, we brought this last time that we brought the report to committee, but the recommendation there is that the policies in place are sufficient, but that we did note on review that some of them were in need of revision, i.e. they hadn't been updated for a number of years. And our recommendation there is simply that a version number be put on those policies, and also a date for revision set on each of those policies. So there's kind of a target by which they have to be done, which isn't in place at the moment. Moving on to improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. Again, the key thing to draw attention to here is the significant risk we've identified. This was in regards to contract management. So we identified that there was an increased risk of exposure for the council in regard to the delivery of key services through contracts. We have carried out a response where we've looked at a number of contracts, and we've looked at the contract review processes in place around a couple of materially significant contracts, and also we looked at a contract that wasn't materially significant as well. So we tried to get a reasonable spread of what we were looking at. We found that in regard to the contracts that were the larger contracts, the material ones, that the contract review process was working effectively. So any issues that might have arisen from those contracts would be detected in a timely manner. There was regular review being undertaken, and any issues in those contracts were being flagged on an appropriate and timely basis. We did identify with the smaller contract that we looked at that process had not taken place during the year. Now, we didn't, as I said before, these significant risks aren't necessarily indicative of anything performance-wise at the council. They can result in a significant weakness, which would then be effectively us making a comment on the arrangements at the council not being at the level of efficiency that we would expect. We have not concluded in this regard that there is a significant weakness, and that's based on the size of the contract. So we've kind of come to a conclusion that the processes are working effectively on those material contracts, So currently we're satisfied that there wouldn't be an outflow of resources that to the detriment of the council. We have raised a recommendation that that control process around those contracts should work the same across the board. So regardless of the size of the contract, there should be regular review and monitoring undertaken. But yeah, as I noted, there's no significant weakness there. It is again just another recommendation to raise. And I think the final point to note just on the AAR is that is a public document, so that gets published alongside the accounts. So it's written kind of from a layman's point of view to be publicly accessible.
Okay, thank you, Emma, and particularly Mark for your work on that report. Members, does anybody have any questions? Councillor Ramage?
Yeah, in particular on contracts. Now, I mean, do you find they have service agreements, that sort of thing, or is there a period where you need to renew it and go out and get new quotes for better value as such, which is what we're about? And when you mentioned the word review, I'd actually written that down as well. So it's just that, I mean, I don't know how significant some of these contracts are, but I should imagine they're quite considerable, some of them.
Yeah, so amongst the things we're looking at, so we looked at the total contract register, which is kind of part of the management process, so to speak. So in terms of that will have review dates within it. It will have the total contract expenditure per annum is also included in there. So you have all of those key metrics, and you're quite right, some of those contracts will be very material in nature in terms of the amounts expended, and that will be looked at, again, if we talk about that document, the register, that will be looked at over the life of the contract and also on a per annum basis, which are two things we kind of looked at when we assessed that. So in terms of the actual contract register and the data that's being tracked through that, no issues noted. This was specific to one contract that we pulled out of there to look at that more detailed management process in terms of the kind of efficiency review and the review of terms in the year and also the delivery against the contract.
And I think it's fair to say that the one that we did identify, there was a specific staff challenge on that one, which has since been rectified. So this is a recommendation to recognise the fact and to sort of reinforce the control that management should have in place in terms of making sure that there is adequate oversight over contract management, regardless of the size. But I think what we are saying is, for those very large, significant contracts, we haven't identified any problems. We found one small problem on one smaller contract, and actually, subsequent to our review, that's obviously been fixed post year end.
I presume if the contractor is not adhering to the contract, you would highlight that as such.
Yeah, and I think that's very much part of that review process that we're picking up on. We want to get assurance that those contracts are being reviewed through the year to check that adherence to the contract and that the terms are being followed and the delivery of all of the contract elements is being followed. Again, depending on the complexity of the contract, of course, that can be quite a significant volume of work. And I think, as Emma said as well, the staff member we spoke to on this was probably the first person to come forward and acknowledge that they needed to be doing that on that, which again is, I think, a positive, really, that kind of in terms of ownership.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to remember. So, from what we are looking at from a value for money is around the arrangements in place to deliver these things. So, what we haven't done is gone back and said, has every single aspect of this contract been delivered? That isn't our role. Our role is to say, do you, Braintree Council, have appropriate mechanisms in place to identify if they hadn't been put in place, i.e. have you got a contract management process which is looking at and challenging contractors, is checking KPIs, those sorts of things. So we looked at the process in place to do it rather than actually us going and verifying that everything has happened on these.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, members. We are asked to note this report, so please can I have a raise of hands to take that this report has been noted? Thank you, members. The report has been noted, so we will now proceed to agenda item 8, which is the local audit reform. So this is set out on page 85 to 89 of the agenda, and I'll re-invite Phil Myers to set out this report.
So obviously we've heard several occasions this evening about the local audit system and how sort of different aspects are trying to get it back on track. So just a reminder from previous reports, a three-stage or three-step approach was proposed by government. So, and that was around reset, and as was mentioned, that was really about resolving all the outstanding audits up to and including the 22-23 accounts by setting the statutory backstop date in December. That's just gone. And then, as you've heard, about the process of recovery then, and how the auditors then seek to rebuild their audit assurance over multiple audit cycles, and therefore there's a series of further backstop dates to allow that process to proceed, whilst also avoiding or trying to avoid the reoccurrence of any backlog arising. But then the third stage was around reform, accepting that there were sort of systematic challenges in the local audit system, and there had been previous reviews around the local audit system, which you know, for whatever reason have perhaps not been taken forward in the way that they were suggested at the time. So the government announced just before Christmas, so they released their paper about proposals around overhauling the local audit system. So this came out just before Christmas on the 18th. It was one of several consultations that were launched at that time. And it was launched in the in the form of a statement of intent, but also an element of consultation. So the paper sets out what the government is intending and proposing to do, but it also highlighted areas where it was also seeking views in order to inform that. The actual paper, it was provided a hyperlink in the report, so obviously members, if they were interested in seeing the full report, obviously you were given the access or the where to find that. So the actual report here, though, summarises really some of the key points that has been drawn out, and I suppose perhaps one of the most fundamental ones is around the proposal or commitment to establishing a new local audit office. And the aim or the idea there is that will bring together as many of the audit functions that are currently undertaken by the various sort of stakeholders in the system. So there are currently 7 oversight bodies that are involved in the system to varying degrees and having various remits and responsibilities. And the aim here is to sort of bring much of that in under the auspice of this single body. Now, there have been pains to say this is not a recreation of the previous audit commission. I'm sure there's probably several members on the committee who will remember the audit commission, and it got disbanded. And I think one aspect of the audit commission, they did have a sort of an arm that actually also provided external audit services through the district audit service. And it's interesting that part of the paper talks about in terms of building capacity and capability within the system, there is talk about maybe trying to bring about some public provision. Whether that's achievable is to be seen, really. As we're talking with KPMG, you know, the pool of people from which that would be drawn from would be from probably the very organisations that have been struggling with capacity and that, and part of the reasons why we had the situation around the backlog in the first place. So we'll have to wait and see. So the paper did set out sort of 6 areas around required reform. So it talks around the purpose of local audit, and it does set out a vision statement around some core principles that if they're achieved, that you know would be suggested that then you would be fulfilling having a proper local audit system in place. As I said, the new local audit office is seen as key to this, but as well alongside that is also doing looking at what councils are currently reporting. So there's been a lot mentioned about the complexity of local authority accounts and how readable they are in effect to most people. And some of that comes from the financial reporting requirements. Councils have to adhere to international financial reporting standards, but then they have a statutory basis as well. So you're trying to do 2 things through the accounts, which does make and add that complexity. And a lot of that complexity then also drives the work of the external auditors. So there's there's an interrelationship between some of the proposals in here. I think, as I said, I think what's set out in the paper really, tries to pick out some of the key elements from the paper, from the paper. So I wasn't going to repeat those. I think obviously the timeline is an interesting timeline that's set out. So suggestion is that the new local audit office could be fully resourced and in place by 2028. And as we've already mentioned this evening, obviously there are other fundamental changes that may arise during that period in the local government sphere. So we'll have to see how this all interacts and how quickly it does get put in place. As a council, we have submitted a response. As I said, the timing of the consultation was great, just before Christmas and in the thick of our budget set in, and with several other consultations. So we have submitted a response to it, because I think, given the interests and the issues we've had over audits, I think it was incumbent of us to submit something. So through Chair, if that's okay, we'll share that response with members following this meeting. I think a main concern expressed within that was really around the capacity of the new organisation to take on all the functions that were suggested, and whether or not that would actually interfere with some reform that could be useful in the sort of immediate term being delayed, whilst they focus on that longer term position. So we have sort of made some comments and around that. The paper also does try to sort of mandate certain elements of arrangements that should operate locally, and particularly committees such as this. So it's mandating having audit committees, but it does sort of then go on to sort of suggesting arrangements as to how authorities might want to include independent members in that role. And I think part of our response was really we feel that those sort of matters should be a local decision. But otherwise nothing more to add, but happy to take any questions. And as I said, we will distribute the response from the council after the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Councillor Ball.
My question really was for you, Chairman, and probably for Phil. When all these changes are coming in, or when they've come in, will members get proper sort of training and so that they can be fully aware of how the new system will work?
Yeah, my view on that is that I know that talking to officers training programme is planned, and with this new reform it's an ideal opportunity to update members on that, but I'll hand over to Phil as well for his views on that matter as well.
Well, I think, yeah, as you said, Chair, I think we've already been talking about a programme of training for this committee, accepting that we've been operating under fairly unusual circumstances with the accounts, but I think there's certain things that I think now we're getting the accounts, the backlog out of the way, that there are things that we probably should be helping members with and increasing your understanding of how the system is working, so you can be effective in your role as an audit committee. So and I think, as you say, the sort of change in landscape is certainly something that we can look to pick up through that as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Ramage.
The proposed sort of timetable, is this something where there's a consultation between auditors, councils, that sort of thing, as far as this is concerned? Because obviously it affects everybody in that regard.
So yeah, the consultation is open to anybody to, and as we said, there are 7 sort of key stakeholders in terms of the oversight, but as you say, firms such as KPMG will clearly have probably views on this as well. So it's open for input from many quarters.
Following on from that, is it in your opinion that we definitely need to have changes, and also do you think it will work?
Well, I think the problems we've had, I think clearly made a need for some change in the system. Whether this is the right change, I think that's what obviously the purpose of this consultation is about. Having that single focus, it could be quite positive in the way that the audit commission had that single focus, but I think the thing is are they trying to create too much too quickly, and therefore will that actually delay the real reforms? I think from our point of view, I think it would be good to see something around the reporting requirements, because as I said, I think it's widely recognised that local authority accounts are not the easiest read for people, and therefore some consideration about how that can be addressed. There's a suggestion about maybe having some standardised statement at some point in the future that could be used, but I think we just have to see how things pan out, really.
Okay, thank you, Phil. We're also asked to note this report this evening, so please could I ask for a raise of hands for this report to be noted? Thank you, members. So this report has been noted, so we will now proceed to agenda item 9, which is our internal audit update, including progress against the 24-25 internal audit plan. So this is set out on page 90 to 103 of tonight's agenda. And can I please invite Angie Mitchell, our Audit, Insurance and Fraud Manager, to set out this report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So the report starts out with reference to the public sector internal audit standards. A bit later on, it does go into a bit more detail about the changes to the global internal audit standards in the UK public sector, which are effective from April. But there will still be a requirement in the new standards for reporting to the committee on progress against work in relation to the audit plan. So the plan we're referring to was approved by this committee in April, and Appendix 1 gives a summary of the progress to date in respect of the planned items of work. Paragraph 3.1.2 refers to the audits which have been completed since the last report to this committee, and all of those have received either a full or significant assurance rating, which is good. 3.1.3 refers to some of the other matters that we're dealing with, which take some of our time. Paragraph 3.2 refers to the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme and external quality assessment. So the EQA was obviously against compliance with the former public sector internal audit standards. So we're now moving towards assessment against the new standards rather than the old public sector internal audit standards. So there's a summary of the changes between the public sector internal audit standards and the global internal audit standards in the UK public sector, the old and new. That's at Appendix 3 of this report. And there are some matters affecting the interaction we have with this committee, and there are some matters for members and some matters around the internal audit way of working. The report also identifies any applications in respect of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and Investigatory Powers Act. So for the former RIPA, there have been no applications in the year to date. However, we have made one Investigatory Powers Act application that was successful. The data was released and the team are working on the data released to them as part of that IPA. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Angie. Does anybody have any questions for Angie this evening? Okay, no, it doesn't look like we do. I think that might be a first. So we are asked to, as previous agenda items this evening, we're asked to note the progress and performance against the 24-25 audit plan. Please can I take it that this report has been noted? Thank you, members. So this report has been noted, so we will now proceed to agenda item 10, which is a fraud update. This is set out on page 104 to 123 of tonight's agenda, and I'll pass straight back over to Angie, who will set out this report.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, so the report starts out with a bit of background information, the national picture relating to fraud. The best information we have at this point is from the CFAS fraud landscape report, fraudscape report, sorry, and their fighting fraud and corruption locally strategy. So that gives some areas of high fraud activity and some of the themes that they suggest to mitigate the risk of fraud and its impact. Paragraph 3.1.4 also refers to the National Fraud Initiative. So we've recently had data matches released for the latest National Fraud Initiative data matching exercise, so the team are currently working through those. Paragraph 3.1.5 refers to the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act 2023, which introduced a new offence of failure to prevent fraud. So the guidance produced to support the introduction of that failure to prevent fraud offence gives some key principles which are identified in 3.1.5, and they're very similar to the guidance for the Bribery Act 2010 failure to prevent bribery offence. So we're obviously reporting to management on that. The failure to prevent fraud element of the ECCTA comes into effect from September this year. Paragraph 3.2 talks about some typical public sector fraud risks, so it's just for your information. And then paragraph 3.3 looks at the council's counter-fraud arrangements, including investigation, data matching and analysis, and the procedures aspect of the procedures relating to fraud. Some of those are currently in the process of being updated, and that includes the basic counter-fraud strategy and dishonesty policy, and gifts, hospitality and conflicts of interest. So they're currently under review internally, so we would hope to bring those to a future meeting of this committee. 3.9 covers some fraud training that has been provided to staff. And Appendix 1 is a summary of the Council's assessment, the Council's position against the Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally strategy for the 2020s. Again, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have Councillor Ramage.
Thank you for that. On item 344, regarding, where are we? The top line, it's saying there was, oh no, sorry, housing benefits, that's right. There's so many things on here you need to look for. Housing benefits, I noticed this year we got 133 overpayments, 133,052. In comparison to 22-23, it was 171,000. But that looks to me, could it be sort of reaching that same sort of figure? And what's the reason why these overpayments have been made? Thank you.
Okay. So the figures will vary if we think particularly about things like the data matching exercises that are undertaken. The main data releases are every 2 years, but with other exercises in between. So we're just on the point of working our way through a big exercise. You'll also note that there's variation there. The council tax support overpayments is on the increase in terms of the overpayments identified. So it's the overall. The housing benefit overpayments are DWP related benefits, and we are currently now able to work with the DWP Fraud Investigation Service to do joint working, so that will help. Sometimes you'll get particularly big cases which sway the figures a bit. And I'm so sorry,
Yeah, what are the main reasons for overpayment?
Okay, so in relation to housing benefits and local council tax support, they'll typically be around living together, so other people in the household, particularly with incomes that aren't declared on their benefit application. It could be around undeclared capital, undeclared income, around the changes in the non-dependents, undeclared pensions. There are all sorts of changes and reasons around it, but it's basically, if you think about all the types of information that we would need to know in order to properly assess someone's entitlement, then any of those aspects could be changed.
You obviously have the tools to investigate all that sort of thing, I assume.
So we have access to various sources of information. We have a trained fraud investigator who follows appropriate protocols to gather information if there's any suspicion that a fraud might have occurred, and we conduct interviews under caution with customers to progress those cases.
Okay, thank you.
Next I have Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Ramage has largely stolen my thunder, but I was just interested in, these are not huge amounts of money in the grand scheme of things. I was just wondering whether the scrutiny of council tax support payments may in fact cost more than the loss that might result if they're not scrutinised.
So the good thing is that the service conducts a lot of checks before it gets to us. So there will be data matching on an ongoing basis. So for changes, for circumstances, there'll be reviews of entitlement and things like that. So the key is to keep the payments to customers as accurate and on a timely basis. So the matters that come to us for investigation are obviously anything that is outside of the scope of the existing checking. I think you have to have a deterrent. It's absolutely essential to show that you're taking action against people that are abusing the system.
I was wondering whether in some cases it's the law of diminishing returns.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Prime.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andy. Just a quick thing on item 3.2, public sector fraud risks, and it lists a load of various things that we should be looking at. How are we doing to mitigate these risks, and are they really prevalent for this council? Thank you.
Thank you. So some of them will be, and take the first one for example. Our HR team have got safe recruitment practices in place, which we would expect to identify any issues here. But one of the things in the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, Failure to Prevent Fraud, is around that top commitment to understanding your fraud risks and taking proportionate action to mitigate them. So this is something we'll be looking at corporately, just to make sure that there is that proper awareness. But yeah, I mean, I haven't. We do schedule internal audit reviews of key fraud risk areas, and I think from what I've seen so far, there's a general good awareness of potential areas of fraud and mitigating controls. Obviously, if we undertake a review and we find otherwise, then we'll report into you at that point. But yeah, so we can perhaps do more to record our fraud risk assessment and mitigation, but I'm not aware of any major concerns at this point.
Just, I mean, thank you very much for explaining some of that. Just certain things I noticed, the blue badge. It's all right sitting in an office and there being issued out. There is fraud with blue badges, and I think everybody knows that. How would you mitigate that? Have we got officers out looking at these things, or do you rely on reports coming back to you to do the investigation?
Okay, so the blue badge is most likely to affect us in terms of parking and people getting free parking when they might not be entitled to it. So I believe there have been instances where the parking partnership have identified questionable use of blue badges, and that's been followed through in that respect. But we don't necessarily have the capacity to go and watch everyone coming out of a car. But yeah, there's a general awareness in the partnership of the risks.
So in theory, you're using outside agencies to look at quite a few of these to report back to you?
So in general terms, fraud can be picked up by a number of different sources. So it can be fed into us externally, it can be reported anonymously to us. We can get reports from members of the public who suspect wrongdoing. So you know, across the whole of the fraud risk area, so we can get information reported to us that way. It could be an internal review by management, it could be work by internal audit. So there are a number of different routes to identifying potential fraud.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Back to Councillor Ramage.
Just one I thought of, which is quite prevalent nowadays, is online fraud. Do you have any of that coming through with, with customers that you deal with?
So are we talking online, we're not talking in terms of cyber security risks?
Well, it kind of comes all under that sort of area.
Okay. So the IT team are very aware of potential risks and are constantly monitoring the situation there.
Because it's a scourge of our age in many ways, online, isn't it?
In terms of other online risks, are you?
Yeah, I mean, people who deal with the council, and make false whatever, it's just,
Yeah. So
just that, there's people out there who do nasty things, if you like.
that, yes, indeed. So yes, a lot of our interaction with members of the public is through online means now. Applications, I think you were mentioning there. But again, the services have got certain protocols around the things that they know they need to check before putting an application through. So
And obviously they're constantly reviewing that as well, because the nature of the animal is that's always changing as well, isn't it?
yes, yeah. So the whole raft of the checks they're conducting on the application itself, on the supporting documents provided by the customer, and the other background checks that might be undertaken, such as through other data matching services. So they're all the types of things that are used to, again, mitigate the risk.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you ever so much, Angie. Members were also asked to note this report, so please could I ask to have this report noted? Thank you, members. So we'll now proceed to agenda item 11, which is the draft Treasury Management Strategy for 2025-26. And this is set out on pages 124 to 139 of the agenda. And I would like to re-invite Mark Jarvis, our Financial Services Manager, to set out this report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Treasury Management Strategy for the 25-26 financial year. That will be as an appendix into the budget report that's going to full council later this month. It's a requirement as part of the Prudential Code and of the 2003 Local Government Act, and members have asked us to review and make any recommendations for full council so the budget can be set. The report is broken down into a number of different sections. It starts off with an external context, which we have put it into the appendix. So this is a narrative from our Treasury advisors, Arlene Close, but obviously it covers past events and members may well be aware because obviously it's quite topical in the news. Section 4, obviously it's the local context and provides details of our capital financing requirement, which identifies the council's underlying need to borrow, which basically is our capital expenditure which has been incurred, which is either waiting for a capital receipt or grant, or we've identified it through borrowing. And as can be seen in Table 1, our CFR from the 31st of March 25 through to the 31st of March 29 reduces as we start financing that debt via revenue provision or through our capital receipts. Also, as part of that table, you can see that our external borrowing is reducing over the MTFS from 5.4 million on the 31st of March 24 through to 3.4 million as at the 31st of March 2029. And that's in relation to our single loan that we took out in May 22 when we refinanced our LOBO debt. That projection is based on our current capital plans that's feeding into the budget in February, and obviously there's no plans to borrow during the short term or medium term. Moving on to Table 2 in Section 4, it provides details of our liability benchmark, which looks at the ability for the council to cover its borrowing need. With the benchmark showing as negative, this indicates that the council has enough reserves and working balances to cover its capital financing requirement and still maintain an investment balance of 10 million. Section 5 looks at our borrowing, As stated, there is no current plans to borrow in the short or medium term. However, we do still have that £5 million on our books. Although there's no plans at the moment to borrow, if things change during the year or future, there are options available for the authority to borrow if and when needed, and our first point of call would be the Public Works Loan Board. Section 6 looks at our treasury investments and details some of the safeguards in order to protect the council's cash. So table 3, to give some context to members, provides a estimate of our average cash balances over the MTFS based on our current capital and revenue plans. And basically, as you can see, the actual average balance is reducing as we use our reserves and cash balances for the capital programme or any planned activity in revenue. And the report goes on. Table 4 shows the approved investment counterparties. So in the event whereby we invest our money, this is the category that we look at. So we look at the sector to which we would invest our money, a time limit, a counterparty limit, and also an overall sector limit. And obviously we try to diversify our funds where we can. Obviously the more secure the sector, the lower the rate return, but we would obviously forfeit yield in order to ensure the cash balances are safe and secure. The only final point I was going to mention is in regards to the financial implication of this report. So based on the forecast average rate of return of 4%, we estimate investment income will be 2.8 million for the financial year 25-26. Interest payable based on our £5 million loan of 123k. And obviously we still have a 70k a year in relation to our premium in respect of our repayment of our LOBO debt back in 2022. And obviously finally the only other point to make is the minimum revenue provision. It's what we do to actually start repaying our debt, and that is estimated to be £799,000 in 25-26. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Do members have any questions for Mark this evening? No, it doesn't look that way. It's all very good news, so thank you for preparing that, Mark. Members, we are asked to, there's two things we need to do here, which is to consider if the committee wishes to propose any members to the strategy or provide any comments or observations, which we haven't done. But if we had of the finance cabinet member for finance, resources or performance, can take this into account when presenting this for the final treasury management support report for full council. But we also need to approve this draft treasury management strategy, subject to any amendments that may come our way, and recommend its approval by full council. So please can I have a proposer to move the recommendations? Councillor Prime, and a seconder, Councillor Ball. So the recommendations have been moved and seconded. I will now put this to the votes. All those in favour, please indicate by a show of hands. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. And that means that the recommendations have been approved. So we'll now proceed to our final agenda item of the evening, which is agenda item 12, the draft programme of work 2025-26. So this is set out on page 140 to 145. And I understand this is something that used to come to committee quite frequently, but over recent years, just to try and make meetings a bit more time efficient, had dropped off. However, under new recommendations and guidance, we're being advised to put this back on the agenda this evening, and I'll hand over to Angie, who will set out this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, it's the global internal audit standards in the UK public sector do recognise that the audit committee, the ideal arrangements are that the audit committee agrees its work plan with the chief audit executive, so that's the equivalent of my role. So the programme of work has been prepared obviously in consultation with those reporting to it, and bear in mind that things can change, timing can change, there may be additional reports that come into you. But this should give a reasonable picture of what to expect in the coming year. Chair, we're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, before I do, personally, I quite like it. I think it's good for people to be able to see upcoming meetings, what's going to be seen, when it's going to be seen. So yeah, thank you for preparing this. Do any members have any questions on this? No, I think it's very straightforward, and but we are asked to agree the Governance and Audit Committee programme of work and to identify any training needs to enable them to effectively discharge their duties. So regarding training needs, what I would suggest to members, now that we know what the programme of work is, I know that Angie and Phil are quite keen. I know Councillor Ball raised a question earlier. If you feel that there's any specific areas, I'd advise you to either email me directly, but copy in Angie and Phil as well, and we'll be able to put that into the programme of training as well. So it is specified around the things that you feel that you might need some training on. But we are asked to obviously agree this evening, so could I please have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Wright, and also a seconder. Councillor Ball, would you be happy to do that? Thank you. So could I please have a, I'll put this to the vote, so all those in favour? Thank you. That is again unanimous. So the this recommendation has been approved.
Yeah, could I just make a comment? Because obviously we're talking about the regular members that attend this committee, but we have substitutes here for tonight, for example. I think we need to make sure whoever is substitute needs to be in that training as well.
Yeah, there are no set, so planning committee have a set agreed substitutes, because to be on the planning committee you have to have formal training. Any member of any political group is able to substitute for anybody that isn't able to make it. So in effect, everybody is a potential, apart from in some meetings, maybe cabinet members, for example, they might not be able to be here because then we propose things to cabinet at occasions. So I'll discuss that with Phil and Angie, because if there is capacity for anybody to have an open door and come to training, then of course we would welcome that. But yeah, just to point out, anybody is effectively a substitute as well. So,
yeah, just you know, I think we need to be professional in what we're doing, you know, and the more knowledge people have got, the better for everybody.
Yeah, without a doubt. So if we've got the capacity to offer that, of course we will do. So, members, this concludes the business for tonight's meeting. The next meeting of the Governance Audit Committee, just a date for your diary, is scheduled to take place on the 16th of April. And the schedule of works is in that final report there, what we'll be looking at. So I'd just like to thank you all for your attendance this evening, and also to those watching on the Council's YouTube broadcast. I will now close this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee at, is it 8:52? And I would like to wish you all a very good night. Thank you very much. Thank you.